Scene 1. The Drive. Marcus Webb had stopped listening to the radio 3 weeks after Linda died. Couldn't stand it. Every station seemed determined to play their song, or something close enough to make his chest tighten. So he drove in silence now, just the hum of the Buick's engine and the sound of his own breathing filling the car. The wedding ring caught the late afternoon light as he gripped the steering wheel. 14 months. 14 months since the funeral, and he still couldn't bring himself to take it off. He shouldn't have been on Maple Grove Road at all. He'd taken a wrong turn, trying to avoid construction. His paper map spread across the passenger seat, doing him no good now that he was already lost. The back roads got narrower with each turn, trees pressing close on both sides, their October branches reaching toward each other overhead like fingers trying to touch. The canopy filtered the sunlight into something thin and sickly. Marcus checked his watch. 4:30. He'd meant to be in Cleveland by 6 for the conference. Medical equipment sales. Same dog and pony show he'd been doing for 15 years. But his heart wasn't in it. Hadn't been in much of any since Linda. Running, he thought. Always running. From the hospital, from the funeral, from the apartment that still smells like her perfume. The road curved downward into a gully, and the temperature dropped like he'd driven into a pocket of winter. Marcus reached for the heat control, then stopped. Through the windshield, he could see a sign coming up on the right. Hand-painted wood, the letters faded but readable. Ironwood Retreat, Wellness Weekends, Vacancy. Beyond it, a modern concrete bridge crossed over what looked like a creek, though Marcus couldn't see the water from here. Just a dark gap between the trees where the land fell away. He should keep driving. Cleveland was still 2 hours out, maybe less if traffic cooperated. He had a hotel reservation, a rental car waiting, a presentation to review. But man, he was tired. Bone tired. The kind of exhaustion that came from not sleeping right for over a year, from lying awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling and thinking about things that couldn't be changed. Wellness, Marcus thought as he slowed the car. Sheesh, like a weekend away, will fix what I did. The bridge passed beneath him with a hollow sound. In his rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of the creek below, just a flash of dark water moving between rocks. Something about it made him uncomfortable, though he couldn't say why. The Ironwood Retreat sat on the other side, tucked into a clearing where the trees pulled back just enough to let it breathe. A main building, office maybe, or common area, anchored the center, with 10 small units arranged in a rough semicircle around it. Everything looked new, well-maintained, the kind of place that appeared in travel magazines under headlines about rustic getaways and finding yourself in nature. The parking lot held exactly 0 cars besides his own. Marcus pulled into a space near the office and cut the engine. Silence rushed in to fill the void. No traffic sounds, no distant highway drone, just the settling tick of the cooling engine and something else. A sound he couldn't quite place. Running water, maybe. The creek. He sat there for 5 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the office door. Through the window, he could see someone moving around inside. A man, older, wearing work clothes. You could still leave, the rational part of his brain suggested. Drive to Cleveland, do your job, sleep in a Holiday Inn and catch the morning flight home. But the rest of him, the part that had been holding on by its fingernails since Linda's last breath in that hospital room, just wanted to stop. To be somewhere that wasn't home, wasn't work, wasn't anywhere he'd been before. Marcus took the keys from the ignition and opened the door. The cold hit him immediately, sharper than it had any right to be in early October. His breath fogged in the air as he walked toward the office, briefcase in one hand, the other shoved deep in his coat pocket. The woods watched him cross the parking lot. He could feel it, somehow, that sense of being observed. The hair on the back of his neck prickled. Stop it, he told himself. You're tired, you're stressed, you're not thinking straight. But he walked a little faster anyway. Scene 2. Check-in. The office was warmer, at least. A wood stove in the corner pumped out heat that made Marcus's skin tingle as he stepped inside. The smell of coffee, old coffee left too long on the burner, mixed with something else. Sawdust, maybe. Fresh-cut lumber. The man behind the desk looked up from a ledger, late 40s, weathered in a way that spoke of outdoor work and hard winters. His hands were scarred and calloused, and his eyes had the particular 1,000-yard quality of someone who'd seen things he'd rather forget. "Help you?" The man's voice came out rough, like he didn't use it much. "I saw the sign," Marcus said. "You have rooms available?" "We do." The man stood, closing the ledger with a soft thump. "Frank Harmon, I manage the place. Marcus Webb." They shook hands. Frank's grip was firm, brief. "You looking for the full retreat experience?" Frank asked, pulling a key from a pegboard behind him. "We're between seasons right now. No spa services, no restaurant, just basic accommodations." "That's fine, I just need somewhere quiet for the night." Marcus shifted his weight. "Maybe 2 nights." Frank studied him for a moment, that weathered face giving away nothing. "You'll get quiet." He set a key on the counter. "Unit 7, the tag read in faded ink. $30 a night. Cash." Marcus pulled out his wallet, counted out bills. No receipt offered, none requested. Frank pocketed the money and pushed a guest book across the counter along with a pen. "Just need a signature and a vehicle description." While Marcus wrote, Frank moved to a filing cabinet and pulled out a pamphlet. Ironwood Retreat, the cover read, above a photo of the compound in what looked like summer. Green trees, blue sky, happy people on the lawn that didn't exist anymore. "Dinner's at 6 if you want it," Frank said. "Just come to the common room in the main building. Nothing fancy, soup and sandwiches." "That's kind of you." "No trouble. Only got 2 guests this weekend, so there's plenty." Frank leaned against the counter. "Fair warning, though. Siren goes off at 8:47. You'll want to be inside your unit by then." Marcus looked up from the guest book. "Siren? Storm warning system. Old habit from the mill days. Folks around here still use it. There's a storm coming? Not tonight." Frank's expression didn't change. "Just how we do things." Something in the way he said it made Marcus's skin prickle, but he nodded anyway. Small towns had their quirks. He'd learned that much traveling for work. His eyes drifted to the wall behind Frank. Photographs in simple frames arranged in a grid. Most showed the retreat under construction. Men in work clothes standing around post holes, cement mixers, framing lumber. One photo caught his attention. A group of maybe 8 men, all holding iron fence posts like they were posing with hunting rifles. "You built this place?" Marcus asked. Frank glanced back at the photos. "My father and I built this place, early 70s. Took us 2 years, him and some others. He passed in 73, right before we finished." "I'm sorry." "Long time ago." Frank turned back to Marcus. He wanted it to be something, a place for people to come and work through things. The way he said it, work through things, made it sound like more than a vacation spot. But Marcus didn't press. Frank reached under the counter and pulled out something small, an iron horseshoe, old and pitted with rust. He set it on the counter next to the key. "Put this above your door before the siren," he said. "Old tradition around here. Humor me." Marcus picked it up. Heavy. Real iron, not the decorative kind you'd buy at a craft store. Above the door? Inside. Above the frame. There's a nail already there. Frank's eyes settled on Marcus's left hand, on the wedding ring. "You lose someone?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He looked down at the ring, turned it with his thumb. "My wife, cancer." "I'm sorry." Frank said it simply, without the usual awkward platitudes people offered. Just acknowledgement. Then, after a pause, "Guilt's a heavy thing to carry." Marcus stiffened. "I'm just here for rest." "Sure you are." Frank pushed the key and horseshoe toward him. "Unit 7's on the north side. You'll see it. Woods behind. Creek view if you look out the back window." Marcus gathered his things, the horseshoe cold and solid in his palm. "Thank you." "Mr. Webb." Frank's voice stopped him at the door. "When the siren goes off tonight, be inside, door locked, and hang that iron like I told you." Marcus wanted to ask why, wanted to understand what kind of storm warning system required iron horseshoes and locked doors. But something in Frank's expression, that 1,000-yard stare, suggested the answer wouldn't make him feel better. "I will," Marcus said, and stepped back out into the cold. The sun had dropped lower while he was inside. Maybe 20 minutes of good light left. He looked across the compound at the units arranged in their semicircle. Unit 7 sat on the far end, tucked close to the tree line. Behind the office, he could hear the creek now. A steady, rushing sound, water moving over rocks. It should have been soothing. It wasn't. Marcus walked to his car, grabbed his overnight bag from the trunk, and headed for Unit 7. The horseshoe weighed heavy in his coat pocket, cold even through the fabric. Somewhere in the woods, a branch cracked, sharp and loud, like something stepping on deadfall. Marcus walked faster. Scene 3, Unit 7. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and Marcus stepped into Unit 7 as the last good light began to fade from the sky. The place was nicer than he'd expected. Clean, at least. A small kitchenette occupied one corner, complete with a 2-burner stove, a dented coffee pot, and a mini fridge that hummed quietly. The main room held a worn couch, a table with 2 chairs, and a double bed pushed against the far wall. A bathroom door stood ajar, revealing white tile and a shower stall. But it was the window that dominated the space. Large, taking up most of the back wall, it framed a view of the woods and, in the distance between the trees, a sliver of Nakin Creek catching the dying light. Marcus set his overnight bag on the bed and shrugged out of his coat. The radiator beneath the window clanked and hissed, working to push warmth into the room. He turned on the lamp beside the bed, then the one on the kitchenette counter. The fluorescent bulb flickered twice before settling into a steady glow. Everything felt like it was waiting. He unpacked what little he'd brought. 1 change of clothes, toiletries, a paperback thriller he'd been trying to read for 3 months and couldn't get past chapter 2. The flask came out last, silver and dented, a gift from Linda on their 5th anniversary. He'd filled it this morning before leaving home, bourbon that burned just right going down. Marcus unscrewed the cap and took a pull. The heat spread through his chest, familiar and numbing. The wedding ring caught the lamplight as he lowered the flask. He stared at it, turning his hand slowly. 14 months, and he still couldn't take it off. Every morning he'd stand at the bathroom sink and reach for it, fingers touching the band, and every morning something stopped him. Not yet, he'd think. Not today. The memory hit him without warning, the way they always did. Sharp and sudden, like stepping on broken glass. Linda in the hospital bed, the morphine drip clicking beside her, counting down the hours. Her hair gone from the chemo, her skin paper-thin and grey. But her eyes still clear, still Linda, looking up at him with something that might have been trust. "I'm going to the conference, honey," he'd said, adjusting her blanket even though she didn't seem cold. "Just 2 days. I'll be back before you know it." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Nashville?" "Yeah, that medical supply thing I told you about." The lie came so easily, he'd practiced it. "Boring as dirt, but they want me there." She'd smiled, tried to anyway. "You work too hard. I'll make it up to you when I get back. We'll watch those old movies you like." Linda's eyes had searched his face, and for one terrible moment, Marcus thought she knew where he was really going, knew about Rachel from the pharmaceutical company, knew about the hotel room already booked under his name. But she just squeezed his hand, weak as a child, and whispered, "I love you. I love you too." And he'd meant it. That was the part that gnawed at him, eating slow like a sickness in his own gut. He'd meant it even as he lied straight to her face. Even as he kissed her goodbye and walked out of that hospital room with Rachel's note burning a hole in his pocket. "Can't wait to see you." Marcus came back to himself standing in Unit 7, the flask still in his hand, his eyes burning. He screwed the cap back on and set it on the kitchenette counter harder than he meant to. The sound echoed in the small space. The iron horseshoe sat beside the flask, accusatory in its simplicity. Frank's words came back to him. "Put this above your door before the siren. Old tradition. Humour me. Superstitious nonsense." Marcus had never believed in that kind of thing. Luck, fate, karma, whatever you wanted to call it. The universe didn't work that way. Bad things happened to good people, good things happened to terrible people, and there was no grand design keeping score. He left the horseshoe where it was. Outside, the sun had finally dropped below the tree line. The woods went from grey to black in what felt like seconds, that October dusk coming fast and final. Marcus walked to the large window and looked out. The creek was invisible now, just a sound in the darkness. Running water over rocks, steady and constant. His reflection stared back at him from the glass. 42 years old, expensive suit rumpled from travel, eyes shadowed with exhaustion he couldn't sleep off. Behind his reflection, the room looked warm and safe. all lit up against the gathering dark. But something about the window bothered him. The way it felt less like looking out and more like something could look in. Marcus pulled the cheap curtains closed. They didn't quite meet in the middle, leaving a gap of about 3 inches. He tried adjusting them, but the rod was bent and they wouldn't budge. Good enough. He checked his watch. 7:15. Still over an hour before the siren Frank had mentioned. Time enough to heat up something from the kitchenette. Maybe try that book again. Maybe just sit in the warm light and not think about hospitals or conferences or women who weren't his wife. The mini-fridge held basics. Milk that smelled fine, butter, a few eggs. The cabinets offered canned soup, crackers, instant coffee. Marcus pulled out a can of chicken noodle and found a pot in the drawer beneath the stove. As the soup heated, he sat at the small table and tried to read. The words swam on the page. Something about a detective and a missing person, and clues that didn't add up. He read the same paragraph 3 times before giving up. The soup bubbled on the stove. Marcus poured it into a chipped bowl and sat eating mechanically, tasting nothing. Outside, full dark had fallen. The kind of darkness you only got in places far from cities, where the trees swallowed the light and gave nothing back. A sound drifted through the walls. Footsteps, maybe, from one of the other units. The other guest Frank had mentioned. Marcus wondered who else would come to a place like this in late October, to a retreat that offered nothing but basic accommodations and isolation. Someone running from something, probably. Same as him. He finished the soup, washed the bowl in the tiny sink, and checked his watch again. 8:30. 17 minutes until the siren. Marcus looked at the door. Solid wood, dead bolt turned. Then his eyes went to the horseshoe still sitting on the counter. "Hang that iron like I told you," Frank had said. The intensity in his voice, the way he'd looked at Marcus's wedding ring and talked about guilt being heavy. What did Frank know about guilt? What did anyone know about what Marcus carried? Outside, the temperature had dropped even further. Marcus could feel it through the walls, through the gaps around the window frame. His breath didn't fog the air inside the heated room, but close to the glass he could see condensation forming, little drops of water running down the pane like tears. 8:45. Marcus walked to the kitchenette and picked up the horseshoe. Heavy, cold. The nail above the door frame was there, just like Frank said, driven deep into the wood. He could hang it, follow the local superstition, humor the old man who'd given him a place to stay. What would it hurt? But something in Marcus rebelled against it, against the idea that a piece of iron could protect him from anything. Linda had died in a hospital surrounded by the best medicine money could buy, and none of it had mattered. No horseshoe above the door, no prayer, no desperate bargain with a universe that didn't listen. Nothing had saved her. Nothing would save him from what he'd done. Marcus set the horseshoe back on the counter. 8:47 exactly. The siren split the night like a knife. Old and mechanical, the kind of sound that belonged to air raid drills and tornado warnings. It rose and fell in a wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the trees, bouncing back from the creek. Marcus stood frozen in the middle of Unit 7, every hair on his body standing up. The sound lasted 30 seconds, maybe less. Then it cut off, leaving a silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Marcus walked to the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to look out. Nothing, just darkness and trees and the sense of water moving somewhere beyond sight. He let the curtain fall and turned back to the room. Everything looked the same. Warm light, closed door, the horseshoe sitting unused on the counter. Marcus poured another drink from the flask and sat on the edge of the bed. It was going to be a long night. Scene 4. First night. The knock. Marcus tried to read, gave up after 20 minutes and turned on the small television perched on the dresser. 3 channels came in, all of them snowy. He watched the news without hearing it. Some story about the election coming up, Reagan and Carter trading barbs. The anchor's mouth moved, but Marcus couldn't focus on the words. He turned it off. 9:30. The room felt smaller somehow, the walls pressing in. Outside, the wind had picked up. Marcus could hear it moving through the trees, branches scraping against each other with sounds like whispers. He stood and walked to the kitchenette, poured the rest of the soup into the pot to reheat. The burner clicked 3 times before catching, blue flame licking around the edges. While it warmed, he opened the mini fridge looking for something else, anything to occupy his hands. That's when he heard it. A soft knock, deliberate. 3 taps. Marcus froze, hand on the fridge door. The knock came again. Same rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. But it wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from the window. Marcus straightened slowly, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. The curtains were still drawn, that 3-inch gap in the middle showing nothing but darkness. Branch, he thought. Just a branch blown against the glass. Except the knocking had been too measured, too purposeful. He walked toward the window, each step feeling like wading through deep water. His hand reached for the curtain. Tap, tap, tap. Closer now, right on the other side of the glass. Marcus jerked the curtain back. Nothing. Just his own reflection staring back, wide-eyed and pale. Beyond the glass, darkness and the vague shapes of trees swaying in the wind. He pressed his face close to the window, cupping his hands around his eyes to block the interior light. The woods were impenetrable, a solid wall of black, no movement, no figure standing outside looking in. Marcus exhaled, his breath fogging the glass. Then he saw it, on the outside of the window, pressed against the pane where his breath couldn't reach it, a handprint. Pale, small, female, and on the wrist, just visible in the reflected lamplight, something white. A hospital bracelet. Marcus stumbled backward, his shoulder hitting the wall. The soup pot on the stove began to bubble over, hissing and spitting. A voice drifted through the glass, muffled, distant, but unmistakably there. Marcus. His legs went weak. He knew that voice, knew it better than his own. Marcus, I'm cold. It was Linda. His rational mind screamed that it couldn't be, that Linda had been dead for 14 months, that he'd watched them lower her casket into the ground on a grey March morning while his mother sobbed and his eyes stayed dry because he couldn't cry, couldn't feel anything but the weight of what he'd done. But the voice was hers. The exact pitch, the slight rasp she'd developed near the end when the cancer had spread to her lungs. Marcus found himself walking back to the window. His hand reached for the glass, trembling. Marcus, please. The voice was clearer now, closer. I'm so cold out here. Let me in. He could see her now. Just barely, a shape resolving out of the darkness. A woman in a white hospital gown, standing just beyond the glass. Her features were obscured, lost in shadow and the reflection of the interior lights. But the shape was right, the height, the way she held herself. Linda? His voice came out as a whisper. It's me, honey. I've been waiting for you. It's so cold. Won't you let me in? Marcus's hand moved to the window latch. All he had to do was unlock it, raise the sash, let her in from the cold. This isn't real, some distant part of his brain insisted. Linda is dead. This is stress, exhaustion, too much bourbon on an empty stomach. But the voice kept talking, and it sounded so much like her. I know you're tired, Marcus. I know it's been hard. But I'm here now. Just open the window. We can be together. His fingers touched the latch. Behind him, forgotten on the stove, the soup pot boiled over completely. The hiss of liquid hitting the burner filled the small space. The sound broke whatever spell had settled over him. Marcus jerked his hand back and turned away from the window. The soup was a mess, spilling over the sides of the pot, the smell of burnt chicken filling the room. He grabbed the pot handle with a dish towel and moved it to the counter, turned off the burner. When he looked back at the window, the figure was still there. Closer now, pressed right against the glass. Marcus. The voice had changed. Still Linda's pitch, but the tone was different, harder. Marcus, open the door. You said window, Marcus heard himself say. You said window before. Silence, just the wind and the distant sound of the creak. Then, don't be difficult, I'm your wife. Open the door and let me in, I forgive you. Forgive him. The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus backed away from the window until his shoulders hit the opposite wall. Forgive me for what? He asked, though he knew. God help him, he knew. For Nashville, for Rachel, for not being there when I called. The voice was still Linda's, but something was wrong with it now. Too knowing, too cold. I called you 3 times that night, Marcus. Where were you? His throat closed up. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in his ears. Linda had never known. He'd made sure of it. Threw away Rachel's note with her hotel room number, never mentioned Rachel's name. Came home from that conference and sat by her hospital bed like nothing had happened, like he hadn't spent 2 nights in a hotel room with another woman while his wife lay dying. So how did this voice know? Marcus. It was changing now, the words stretching and distorting. Open. The door. He looked toward the door. Solid. Locked. But there was no horseshoe above it. Nothing but bare wood and the empty nail waiting for iron that Marcus had refused to hang. Water began to pool beneath the door. Dark water, smelling of rot and earth. Creek water. The voice outside screamed. Not words anymore, just sound. Rage and hunger and something else, something that had never been human. Marcus ran to the kitchenette counter and grabbed the horseshoe. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold it. He stumbled to the door, reached up, tried to hook the horseshoe over the nail. It fell, clattered to the floor. The water under the door spread wider. The screaming grew louder. Marcus grabbed the horseshoe again, stood on his toes, forced his shaking hands to steady. The horseshoe caught on the nail, held. The screaming cut off like someone had thrown a switch. The water stopped spreading. Marcus stood frozen, chest heaving, staring at the door. Sweat ran down his face despite the cold. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst. Slowly, he turned to look at the window. The handprint was still there, but the figure was gone. Marcus walked to the window on legs that barely held him. He looked out into the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just trees and wind and the sound of water running over rocks. As he turned back to the room, he saw it. Written in the condensation on the inside of the glass, letters forming slowly as he watched. I know what you did. Marcus grabbed his coat, thought about running as he put it on. But where would he go? 7 miles through the woods to the highway, down Maple Grove Road in the dark, past the creek. Something told him he wouldn't make it. He looked at the horseshoe above the door, at the water already starting to dry on the floor, at the words on the window beginning to fade as the condensation evaporated. Frank had known. Somehow, the old man had known this would happen. Marcus pulled the curtains closed, making sure they covered as much of the window as possible. He turned off all the lights except the small lamp by the bed. Then he sat on the edge of the mattress, still wearing his coat, and stared at the door. The flask sat on the nightstand. He didn't touch it. He needed to be sober, needed to stay awake. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, and somewhere in that sound, just barely audible, Marcus could have sworn he heard his name being called. He didn't answer. He sat in the dim light, watching the door, watching the window, and waited for dawn. Scene 5. Morning after. Marcus woke to pale October light filtering through the curtains of Unit 7, his neck cramped from sleeping upright in the chair. The flask lay empty on its side near his feet. His mouth tasted like copper and regret. For a moment, he let himself believe it had been a dream. The alcohol, the exhaustion, the grief, they'd conspired to make him see things, hear things. Linda's voice at the window was just his guilt made audible by too much whiskey and not enough sleep. Then he looked at the window. The handprint was still there, pale against the glass, fingers spread wide. Condensation had frozen it in place overnight, each whorl and line visible in the morning frost. Marcus stood on shaking legs and approached the window. Up close, he could see it clearly. A woman's hand, small and delicate, the kind of hand that had held his on their wedding day, the kind of hand that had gripped his too tight in that hospital bed, morphine making her afraid of letting go. He touched the glass from his side. The print was on the outside. His stomach lurched. He barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up what little was in his system. 10 minutes later, dressed in yesterday's rumpled clothes, Marcus stepped outside. The morning air hit him like a slap, clean and cold, and mercifully real. Gravel crunched under his shoes as he walked toward the main office, then veered away when he spotted Frank near the maintenance shed. The groundskeeper was splitting firewood with the kind of methodical efficiency that spoke of decades doing the same task. He looked up as Marcus approached, but didn't stop working. The axe rose and fell, rose and fell. "You look like you had a rough night," Frank said. Marcus stopped a few feet away, hands shoved in his pockets against the cold. "What the heck was that last night?" "You see something?" Frank set another log on the chopping block. "I heard." Marcus trailed off. How did you explain hearing your dead wife's voice without sounding insane? I heard my wife, at the window. The axe paused mid-swing. Frank lowered it slowly, studying Marcus with those weathered eyes. You hang up the iron? Eventually. That's why you're still here. Frank split the log in one clean stroke. Marcus laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. That's insane. You know that's insane, right? You staying another night? I'm leaving, right now. Frank nodded, unsurprised. Car's that way. Marcus turned and walked toward the parking lot, his Buick waiting exactly where he'd left it. The morning sun glinted off the hood. Everything looked normal, clean, real. Not like the fever dream of last night. He slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. Click. Nothing. Not even the cough of an engine trying to turn over. Just a dead, hollow click. Marcus tried again. Click. Again. Click. No. He slammed his palm against the steering wheel. No. He popped the hood and got out. The engine looked fine. No visible problems. No disconnected wires. He checked the battery terminals. Secure. Everything looked exactly as it should. Frank appeared at his elbow like a ghost. Marcus hadn't heard him approach. Battery's dead, Frank said. It was fine yesterday. Happens sometimes. Frank closed the hood with a gentle click. I can get you a jump by this afternoon, or you can wait till Monday when the mechanics open. Marcus stared at him. Today's Saturday. Yep. The word hung in the cold air between them. Marcus looked past Frank, toward the road that wound up out of the hollow. Maple Grove Road, disappearing into the trees. How far to the main highway? 7 miles. Through the woods or along the road. Your choice. Marcus looked at the woods. Dense, dark even in daylight. The trees pressed close to the property line, their branches reaching over the fence like fingers. Something in his gut, the same instinct that had made him hang the iron horseshoe last night, said, Don't go into those woods alone. He looked back at Frank. I'll wait for the jump. Smart. Frank started walking back toward the maintenance shed, then paused. Stay inside tonight, before the siren. And this time, don't answer if she calls. Marcus watched him go, that casual statement hanging in the air like smoke. Don't answer if she calls. Not if you hear something. Not if you think you hear something. She. As if Frank knew exactly what had been at his window last night. As if it happened all the time. Marcus walked back to Unit 7, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. The chair still facing the window, the lights still on, the iron horseshoe still hanging above the door frame. He locked the door behind him and leaned against it, closing his eyes. The apartment still smelled like Linda's perfume. Even here, 100 miles from home, he could smell it. Lavender and vanilla and something floral he'd never been able to name. Marcus opened his eyes. The smell was gone. Just the faint mustiness of a rental unit and the coffee he'd made last night, but never drank. He walked to the window and looked out at the woods, at Nakin Creek, visible in the distance, at the trees that seemed to lean toward the compound like spectators watching a show. This place, the whole hollow, it pulls things out, things you buried. Frank's words from the morning echoed in his head. Marcus pressed his forehead against the glass, right over the handprint on the other side. I'm sorry, he whispered. Linda, I'm so sorry. The woods didn't answer. Scene 6. The other guest. By midday, the sun had burned off the morning chill, and Marcus found himself restless in Unit 7. The walls felt too close, the silence too thick. He needed air, space, something other than his own thoughts. He found her by the pool. The pool had been drained for winter, its blue-painted bottom cracked and scattered with leaves. But someone had dragged a folding chair to the edge, and a woman sat there with a sketch pad balanced on her knees, pencil moving in quick, sure strokes. She looked up as Marcus approached and smiled. It was the kind of smile that reached the eyes, warm and genuine and slightly sad. Marcus hadn't seen a smile like that in a long time. Beautiful light here, isn't it? She gestured at the tree line with her pencil. Haunted, though. You feel it? Marcus stopped a few feet away, defensive. I don't believe in that stuff. The woman laughed. Not mockingly, just a soft, knowing sound. Neither did I. Then I stayed 3 nights. She stood and offered her hand. Rita Schultz, Unit 4. Marcus Webb, Unit 7. He shook her hand. Her grip was firm, her fingers stained with charcoal. Artist's retreat, Rita said, gesturing at her sketch pad. That's what I told myself when I came here. 6 weeks ago now. 6 weeks? Marcus looked back at the main office, then at Rita. That's a long retreat, isn't it? She sat back down, patting the concrete beside her. After a moment's hesitation, Marcus sat. Rita's sketch pad showed the tree line, but not quite right. The trees in her drawing leaned inward, their branches reaching towards something in the center of the page. A building. No, buildings. The Ironwood Retreat compound, rendered in charcoal and shadow. You're good, Marcus said. I'm obsessed. Rita tilted the pad, studying her work. That's different. This place, it gets under your skin, into your head, makes you see things. Marcus thought about the handprint on his window. What kind of things? Rita set down her pencil. Something called to me, first night, sounded like my daughter. The way she said it, simple, matter of fact, made Marcus's throat tight. Your daughter, he said carefully. Is she? Dead. 10 years now. Leukemia. Rita picked up the pencil again, rolling it between her fingers. Sarah was 7, bald from chemo, thin as a rail, but she never complained. Not once, even at the end. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Doesn't bring her back. Rita looked at him, really looked at him, and Marcus felt exposed. You lost someone too. I can tell. My wife, cancer. Of course. Rita nodded, unsurprised. That's what this place does. It finds the grief, the guilt. It uses them. Marcus shifted on the hard concrete. I don't. The first night I was here, I heard her voice. Sarah's voice. At the window. Rita's pencil moved again, sketching something new. She said, Mommy, I'm cold. Let me in. Just like she used to say when she'd have nightmares, when she'd crawl into bed with me. The sketch was taking shape. A window, a small figure pressed against the glass. What did you do? Marcus asked. Rita's hands stilled. I didn't hang the iron the first night. Frank gave it to me, just like he gave you yours, I bet. But I thought it was silly, superstitious nonsense. So you opened the door. So I opened the door. Rita set down the pencil and looked at her hands. I woke up on the floor, soaking wet, covered in, I don't know what. Creek water, maybe. Smelled like rot and earth. And I had this. She pushed up her sleeve. On her wrist, faded but visible, was the ghost of a mark. Like a hospital bracelet had been there, tight enough to leave an impression. Sarah's name was on it, Rita said softly. Her date of admission, the day they took her in for the last time. Marcus felt cold despite the sun. Why are you still here? Because I need to understand what it wants. What if it just wants to kill you? Rita looked at him, and her eyes were ancient. What if it wants me to remember what I forgot? What I buried? Marcus stood abruptly. The concrete had left his legs stiff, and he needed to move. I should go. Hang the iron, Marcus. Rita picked up her pencil again. Don't open the door. And when it sounds like someone you love, that's when it's most dangerous. He walked back toward Unit 7, Rita's voice following him across the empty pool deck. It knows things. Things you didn't tell anyone. Things you maybe didn't even tell yourself. Marcus didn't look back. Inside Unit 7, he locked the door and leaned against it. His hands were shaking. He walked to the window. The handprint was gone, dissolved by the afternoon sun. But now there was condensation on the inside of the glass. Impossible. It was warmer inside than out. Marcus stepped closer. The condensation wasn't random. It formed letters, crude but deliberate. Forgive me, he touched the glass. The letters smeared under his fingers, leaving wet trails. Marcus wiped his hand on his pants and backed away from the window. The afternoon light slanted through the glass, illuminating dust motes that hung in the air like snow. Everything looked normal, clean, real. But the words had been there. Marcus pulled out his flask, then remembered it was empty. He'd poured it out last night after what? After hearing his dead wife's voice? After seeing a handprint that couldn't exist? He sat in the chair and stared at the window until the sun began to set. Scene 7. Flashback. The conference Nashville. 18 months ago. Before Linda got sick. No, that wasn't true. She was already sick, they just didn't know it yet. The cough she couldn't shake. The weight she kept losing no matter what she ate. The tiredness that made her fall asleep on the couch every night by 8. Marcus had told himself she was fine. Just stressed. Just tired. Just getting older, like everyone did. The medical equipment sales conference was at the Opryland Hotel, one of those massive complexes with an indoor river and enough meeting rooms to host a small city. Marcus checked in on a Thursday afternoon, his suitcase packed with business casual clothes and brochures for the new imaging equipment his company was pushing. Linda had driven him to the airport. She'd looked pale in the parking garage fluorescence, her hands thin on the steering wheel. "I'll be back Sunday night," he'd said, kissing her cheek. 3 days. You'll barely notice I'm gone." "I always notice." She'd smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Be safe." He should have stayed. But he'd gotten on the plane and flown to Nashville and checked into the hotel and gone to the first reception in the main ballroom, where pharmaceutical reps circulated like sharks, all white teeth and practiced smiles. That's where he met Rachel. She was younger than him by a decade, 30, maybe 32. Sales rep for a pharmaceutical company based in Chicago. Dark hair, confident laugh, the kind of woman who could make you forget you were wearing a wedding ring. They'd talked at the reception, just talked, about sales quotas and difficult clients and the soul-crushing monotony of hotel conferences. It was innocent. The second night, they'd had dinner. Still innocent. 2 colleagues sharing a meal, comparing notes about the industry. The third night, the keynote speech had run long. By the time Marcus got back to his room, it was after 11. He unlocked the door to find 3 message slips on the carpet, where the front desk had slid them under. All from Linda. The timestamps showed she'd called during the keynote, 7:45, 8:23, 9:17. Too late to call back now. Linda went to bed early these days. He'd been standing in his hotel room, tie loosened, when someone knocked. "Rachel." "Nightcap?" she'd said, holding up a bottle of wine. Marcus should have said no. Should have closed the door. Should have called Linda right then and found out why she'd called 3 times, why her voice on the voicemail had sounded so thin and scared. But he'd said yes. And when Rachel kissed him, he'd kissed her back. And when she'd stayed, he'd let her. In the morning, the hotel phone's message light was blinking. Marcus called the front desk. 3 more messages from Linda. She'd called twice more around midnight, once at 6 a.m. He'd called her back from the airport, his stomach sick with guilt and fear. "Where were you?" Her voice had been barely a whisper. "I called. I needed you." "Sorry, honey. Conference ran late. Phone was on silent." The lie had come so easily, so smoothly, like he'd practiced it. "I fell, in the bathroom. I couldn't get up for almost an hour." Marcus had gripped the phone tighter. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine now, just shaken. I tried to call. I'm so sorry. I'm coming home. I'll be there in a few hours." "Okay." A long pause. "Marcus, I love you. I love you too." Another lie. Or was it? Could you love someone and still betray them? 4 months later, the doctors found the cancer. Stage 4. Already in her lungs, her liver, her bones. Terminal. Linda never knew about Rachel. Marcus had made sure of that. He never mentioned the conference again. She died never knowing, and Marcus had told himself that was a kindness, that some truths were better left buried, but guilt didn't stay buried. It grew. It festered. It ate him alive from the inside. Marcus jolted back to the present, his face wet with tears. He was still sitting in the chair in Unit 7, the afternoon light now gone, replaced by the grey of approaching dusk. For the first time since Linda's funeral, he let himself cry. Scene 8. Second night. The penitent. By 9 o'clock, Marcus had made his preparations. The flask sat on the kitchen counter, still empty. He'd thought about finding more alcohol. Frank probably kept a supply somewhere, but no, not tonight. Tonight he needed to be clear-headed. Every light in Unit 7 was on. The bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchenette, the sitting area. Marcus had flipped every switch, turned every lamp, until the unit blazed like a lighthouse. The iron horseshoe hung secure above the door. Marcus had checked it 3 times, making sure the nails were driven deep into the frame. He sat in the chair facing the window, hands gripping the armrests. 8:47 came and went. The siren sounded, that same old air raid wail that made his teeth hurt. Through the window, he watched the woods darken. 9:15. A soft knock at the window. Marcus didn't move. Another knock, deliberate, patient. He kept his eyes on the glass, watching for movement in the darkness outside. Nothing, just his reflection staring back, a middle-aged man with hollow eyes, sitting alone in a too-bright room. Then a hand pressed against the glass from outside. Pale, delicate, female. A hospital bracelet dangled from the wrist. Marcus's breath caught. He stood slowly, his legs unsteady. "Marcus," the voice drifted through the glass, muffled but unmistakable. Linda's voice. Marcus, I'm so cold. Let me in. He walked to the window, each step feeling like moving through water. His hand reached out, hovering inches from the glass. On the other side, the pale hand pressed harder, fingers spread wide. Please, Marcus. It's cold out here. I need you. Her voice, the cadence, the tone, the slight catch on the word please that she always had when she was scared. Marcus pressed his palm against the glass, matching the handprint on the other side. Linda, I've been waiting for you. The voice was softer now, intimate. So long, waiting in the dark, waiting for you to come. You're not real. But even as he said it, Marcus wasn't sure. A face emerged from the darkness beyond the glass. Features obscured by shadow and distance, but the shape was right. Linda's delicate bone structure, her small chin, her high cheekbones. I'm real. I'm right here. Just open the door, baby. Let me in from the cold. Marcus's hand slid down the glass, leaving a streak in the condensation. I waited for you, the voice continued. In that room, in that bed. I called and called. You never came. His stomach twisted. I came. I was there. Where were you, Marcus? When I called that night, where were you when I fell? The hospital bracelet on the wrist caught the light from inside. Marcus could almost read the name on it. Almost. I was at a conference. You know that? Do I? The face pressed closer to the glass. What kind of conference keeps you from answering the phone? What kind of conference makes you lie? Marcus backed away from the window. Stop it. I know where you were. The voice was colder now, harder. I know what you did. I know about Rachel. His legs gave out. Marcus sat down hard on the floor, his back against the wall. I know about the hotel room, about the wine, about how you kissed her while I was falling in the bathroom, alone, scared, calling for you. Linda, please. I know. The thing outside shrieked, and the window rattled in its frame. I know everything. Every lie, every betrayal, every moment you chose her over me. Marcus covered his ears, but the voice cut through. You owe me, Marcus. You owe me the truth. You owe me your guilt. Open the door. He looked up. The face was clear now, pressed so hard against the glass that features flattened grotesquely. The eyes were open. They were black, completely black. Not Linda's warm brown eyes, but holes, voids, empty spaces where something human should have been. Marcus scrambled to his feet and stumbled to the door. His hand reached for the iron horseshoe, fingers closing around the cold metal. All he had to do was pull it free. Open the door. Let her in. End this guilt, this pain, this constant weight of what he'd done. Marcus, baby, I forgive you. The voice was soft again, loving, Linda's voice saying Linda's words. I know you're sorry. I know you loved me. Just open the door. We can be together. No more guilt, no more pain. Just us. His fingers touched the horseshoe, cool metal against his skin. I've been so cold, Marcus, so alone. Please don't leave me out here. Please. Marcus looked down. Water was pooling under the door. Dark water, smelling of creek mud and rot. His hand froze. Linda, he said slowly. What was our song, the one we danced to at our wedding? Silence. What was it? Marcus, don't do this. The voice had changed, not quite Linda anymore. Just open the door. Tell me the song. If you're really Linda, you'll know. More water seeped under the door, spreading across the floor in dark fingers. Our song doesn't matter. What matters is now. What matters is forgiveness. What matters is... You don't know. Marcus stepped back from the door. You don't know because you're not her. The thing outside screamed. The window cracked, a spiderweb fracture across the center. The door shook violently, wood groaning against the frame. Water flooded under the door in a rush, soaking the carpet. Marcus backed away from the door, his hand still touching the horseshoe mounted above it. You owe me. The voice was inhuman now, all pretense of humanity stripped away. You owe her. Pay your debt. I can't pay it to you. Marcus shouted back. You're not her. You're something else. The door buckled but held. The iron horseshoe above the frame glowed faintly in the lamplight, or maybe that was just Marcus's imagination. Either way, it held. Marcus didn't know what made him do it, didn't know where the words came from, but he spoke to the thing as if it was his wife, as if Linda could somehow hear him through this creature wearing her shape. Linda, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. His voice broke. I betrayed you. I lied to you. I wasn't there when you needed me most. I can't take it back. I can't change what I did, and I can't ask your forgiveness, not from this thing pretending to be you. The door stopped shaking. The water stopped spreading. But I loved you. I did. and I'll carry what I did for the rest of my life. The guilt is mine. Not this thing's. Mine. Silence. Marcus pressed his hand against the door. I won't let this thing use your face to kill me. I won't give it what it wants. Because that's not what you would want. The real you. My Linda. More silence. Then, barely audible. No. The voice was fading. Not what she wants. The water began to recede, flowing back under the door as if being sucked out by an invisible drain. The window stopped creaking. The darkness outside retreated. When Marcus looked through the cracked glass, he saw nothing. Just the night. Just the trees. Just the empty grounds of Ironwood Retreat. He collapsed on the floor and wept until exhaustion took him. Scene 9. Rita's fate. Morning came with the sound of sirens, not the evening warning, but the urgent wail of emergency vehicles. Marcus woke on the floor of Unit 7, his body stiff and aching. Sunlight streamed through the cracked window, illuminating the water stains on the carpet that proved last night had been real. The sirens cut off abruptly. He stood, every joint protesting, and looked out the window. An ambulance sat in the parking lot near Unit 4, its lights still rotating silently. 2 paramedics stood near the back doors, talking to Frank. Marcus pulled on his shoes and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp and clean, scrubbed fresh by a breeze that made the trees whisper. It felt obscene, this beautiful October morning, so at odds with the horror of last night. He found Frank near the ambulance. The groundskeeper looked older in the daylight, the lines around his eyes deeper. "Rita?" Marcus asked. Frank nodded. "Gone." "Dead?" "They're calling it a drowning. Found her in Unit 4 this morning when she didn't answer the door for checkout." Marcus felt cold despite the sun. "Drowning? We're nowhere near water." Frank looked at him. "Water in her lungs. Creek water by the smell. And this." He held out a hospital bracelet in a plastic evidence bag. The paramedics must have given it to him. The name on it read, Sarah Schultz. The date was from 10 years ago. Marcus stared at the bracelet. She let it in. She wanted to. Some folks do. Frank pocketed the bag. They think if they just give in, the guilt will stop eating them. They think the thing offers forgiveness. Does it? Frank's expression was grim. No, the penitent doesn't offer forgiveness. It offers drowning. Marcus thought about Rita by the pool, sketching the tree line, the sad smile that reached her eyes. The way she'd talked about her daughter like the grief was a living thing inside her. "I need to understand what it wants." "What is it?" Marcus asked. "Really?" Frank was quiet for a long moment, watching the paramedics load a gurney into the ambulance. The shape under the white sheet was small. Rita had been a small woman. "Something old," Frank finally said. "Something that feeds on guilt, on regret, on all the things we bury and try to forget. It's been here since before the mill, before the town. The Guardians used to keep it contained, kept it sleeping, but when they left..." He trailed off. "Guardians?" Marcus latched onto the word. Frank had mentioned them before. Folks who understood that some things don't stay buried, that some places are thin between what is and what was, between the living and the hungry. They kept watch, kept the old things contained. Frank looked at the woods surrounding Ironwood Retreat. "My father was one. Built this place as a last outpost, died before he could finish the work. And you?" "I'm just keeping watch, making sure folks know the rules, offering them the iron." Frank's voice was heavy with weariness. "Most of them hang it, some of them don't. I can't force them." The ambulance doors closed, the paramedics climbed in, and the vehicle pulled away slowly. No sirens, no urgency. The dead had all the time in the world. Marcus watched it disappear up Maple Grove Road. Marcus looked at the woods surrounding Ironwood Retreat. "My car?" Frank pulled a set of jumper cables from his pocket. "Batteries charged. You're free to go." Marcus nodded slowly. He had preparations to make. Scene 10. The departure. Morning sun cut through the trees like amber knives, painting long shadows across Ironwood Retreat's parking lot. Marcus Webb stood beside his Buick LeSabre, one hand resting on the warm hood, and realized he'd been holding his breath. The engine ticked as it cooled from the test run Frank had suggested. Battery charged. Tank half full. Nothing keeping him here except the strange reluctance to leave this place that had nearly killed him. He'd packed his overnight bag before dawn, moving through Unit 7 in the grey pre-morning light. The iron horseshoe still hung above the door where he'd placed it with shaking hands 2 nights ago. He'd stood there for 5 minutes, staring at it, before finally taking it down and slipping it into his jacket pocket. Some things were worth keeping. The window where the penitent had pressed her stolen face showed no trace of last night's horror, just clean glass reflecting the October sky. But when Marcus had run his hand along the sill, his fingers came away damp with creek water. "You did good." Marcus turned. Frank Harmon stood 10 feet away, hands in the pockets of his work jacket, weathered face unreadable in the morning light. The groundskeeper looked older in daylight, the lines around his eyes deeper, but there was something else too. Relief, maybe, or respect. "I didn't do anything," Marcus said. "I just didn't open the door." That's more than most folks manage. Frank walked closer, boots crunching on gravel. Rita wanted to believe forgiveness could come from that thing. A lot of people do. They think if they just surrender to it, the guilt will stop eating them alive. Marcus's throat tightened. He'd been so close. His hand on the iron horseshoe, the penitent's voice promising peace, an end to the weight he'd carried since Linda's funeral. If he'd been half a second weaker, if the thing had known the name of their wedding song. "Does it ever stop?" Marcus asked quietly. "The guilt?" Frank considered this, gaze drifting toward the tree line, where Knacking Creek whispered through the hollow. "Don't know. I'm not carrying the kind you are. But my father used to say guilt's like a stone in your pocket. You can't make it disappear, but you can choose whether to let it drag you down or use it to remember, to do better." His hand emerged from his pocket holding something small. Marcus wanted to ask why Frank stayed, but the answer sat heavy in the silence between them. Some debts couldn't be abandoned. Some watches had to be kept. "Why me?" Marcus finally said. "Why did it come for me and not the other guests?" "Can't say for certain. The penitent feeds on guilt, but not just any guilt, the buried kind. The secrets that eat you from inside because nobody knows but you." Frank's eyes met his. "You were ripe for it, Marcus, walking around with that lie festering. Your wife died never knowing what you did, and you thought you could just carry that alone forever." The words should have stung, but they didn't. Marcus had spoken his confession to Linda's grave in his mind 100 times during the sleepless hours before dawn. The truth had teeth, but at least it was his truth now, not the penitent's. "I'm going to her grave," Marcus said, "to tell her, out loud this time." Frank nodded slowly. "That's good. That's real good." He held out what he'd been carrying, a business card, old and faded, the edges soft with age. "But after that, if you need to talk to someone who really understands what you went through here, this man can help." Marcus took the card. Heavy stock paper, yellowed with time. The printing was simple, almost old-fashioned. Harold McKinnon, Willow's Bend. No phone number, just an address on Maple Grove Road. "Harold's one of the last ones," Frank said. "A real guardian. He knows things about the darkness in these parts that I only half understand. If that thing marked you somehow, if you need protection or just need to know you're not crazy, Harold will listen." Marcus turned the card over. Blank. He thought about Rita Schultz's sketchbook, the drawing of the woman with black hole eyes, the caption that had made his blood freeze. "I let her in." He thought about the hospital bracelet that had appeared under his door this morning, his name printed on the paper band in neat hospital script, though he'd never been a patient anywhere. Did it mark me? Don't know yet. Frank's honesty was almost comforting. You stood up to it, refused it. That's rare enough that the thing might remember you, might come looking again, different place, different face, or might leave you be because you proved you won't break. He paused. Keep that iron horseshoe. Sleep with it under your pillow if you have to. And if you hear her voice again, anywhere, you call Harold. Marcus slipped the card into his wallet, right behind his driver's license, where he wouldn't lose it. The leather was worn smooth from Linda's hospital insurance cards, removed and replaced so many times during those final months. Her Medicare card was still in there. He hadn't been able to throw it away. Thank you, Marcus said, for the iron, for not thinking I was insane, for watching, Frank finished. It's what we do, what some of us still do anyway. They stood in the parking lot as the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist that clung to the hollow like grave cloth. Somewhere down the slope, Nakin Creek rushed over stones, the sound almost peaceful in daylight. Almost. Marcus extended his hand. Frank shook it, the grip firm and calloused. "What about you?" Marcus asked. "How long will you stay here?" Frank's smile was tired but genuine. "Until it's time to go. My father built this place to hold the line. Someone's got to keep watch. Make sure what sleeps in the hollow stays sleeping. And if it doesn't, then I'll do what needs doing, same as he would have." Marcus wanted to argue, to tell Frank it wasn't his burden to carry alone, but he saw the set of the man's shoulders and understood. Some debts were chosen. Some watches were kept until the last breath, not from obligation, but from love. He climbed into the Buick, key already in the ignition. The engine caught on the first try, rumbling to life with reassuring mechanical normalcy. Marcus rolled down the window. "If you ever need anything," he started, but Frank was already shaking his head. "I know where to find help if I need it. You focus on living, Marcus. Really living. That's the best way to honor the dead." Marcus nodded, throat tight. He put the car in gear, but before he could release the brake, Frank stepped forward and placed something on the passenger seat through the open window. An iron horseshoe. Different from the one Marcus carried, older and more worn, but unmistakably protective. "For your front door," Frank said. "When you get home, hang it above the threshold with the ends pointing up. Old tradition. Humor me." Marcus picked up the horseshoe. It was heavier than it looked, the metal cold despite the morning warmth. "I will. I promise." Frank stepped back, hands returning to his pockets. He looked small suddenly, alone in the empty parking lot with the weight of Ironwood Retreat on his shoulders. Behind him, the 10 units sat quiet and waiting, windows dark except for Unit 7, where morning sun glinted off glass. Marcus released the brake and drove slowly up the gravel drive, watching Frank in the rearview mirror. The groundskeeper didn't wave or move, just stood watching until the Buick crested the rise and turned onto Maple Grove Road. The road climbed away from the hollow, trees pressing close on both sides. Marcus kept his eyes forward, but he couldn't stop himself from glancing in the rearview mirror one last time. Down the slope, past the curve where the road descended, he could just see the roof of Ironwood Retreat and the dark smudge of forest beyond. For just a moment, he thought he saw a figure in white standing at the tree line, hospital gown pale against the shadows, watching him leave. Then he blinked, and there was nothing there but trees and morning light. Marcus pressed the accelerator and drove faster, putting distance between himself and the hollow. The iron horseshoe rattled on the passenger seat. Harold McKinnon's card sat in his wallet like a promise or a warning. The guilt was still there. Linda's face still haunted his thoughts. Her voice still echoed in quiet moments. But something had changed in Unit 7 during those terrible hours when the penitent had worn his dead wife's shape and demanded entry. He'd spoken the truth out loud, not to the thing that wanted to devour him, but to himself. "I betrayed you. I lied. I wasn't there when you needed me." The words hadn't absolved him, but they'd been real. His, not buried anymore. Marcus drove through the October morning, heading toward Linda's grave and the confession he'd been too afraid to speak. Behind him, Ironwood Retreat settled back into its watching silence, and Frank Harmon walked the fence line one more time, checking the iron posts that kept the darkness contained. Some debts were paid in truth. Some watches were kept until the end. And some roads led forward, even when the guilt came along for the ride. Scene 11. The cemetery. The cemetery sat on a hillside 2 hours north of Ironwood Retreat, overlooking a valley that Marcus had always thought looked peaceful. Linda had picked the spot herself during one of her last good days, when the morphine wasn't clouding her mind, and she could still talk about practical things without crying. She'd pointed to the slope beneath the old oak tree and said it reminded her of the park where they'd had their first picnic. Marcus hadn't been back since the funeral. He pulled the Buick through the iron gates at 11:30, tires crunching on the gravel path that wound between headstones. October sun slanted through the trees, throwing shadows that moved with the breeze, and the whole place smelled of cut grass and fallen leaves. Normal, peaceful, nothing like the hollow he'd left behind. But his hands were shaking on the steering wheel. He parked in the small lot near the maintenance shed, engine ticking as it cooled, and sat staring at the dashboard for 5 full minutes. The iron horseshoe Frank had given him sat on the passenger seat. Harold McKinnon's card was in his wallet. The horseshoe from Unit 7 weighed down his jacket pocket. All these talismans against darkness, and still his heart hammered against his ribs, like it was trying to escape. "She never knew," the voice in his head whispered. "She died loving you, thinking you were faithful, and now you're going to ruin that. You're going to taint her memory with the truth." Marcus closed his eyes. That was the lie talking. The same lie he'd been feeding himself for 14 months, the one that had made him ripe for the penitent's hunger. Linda hadn't died loving a faithful husband. She died loving a liar, and the only way to honor her now was to stop lying. He got out of the car. The walk to her grave took him past rows of stones marking the ordinary deaths of ordinary people. Natural causes, car accidents, the quiet tragedies of heart attacks and strokes, and time simply running out. Linda's section was newer, the grass still a slightly different shade where it had been replanted after the burial. Some graves already had flowers, others sat bare except for the standard cemetery plantings. Linda's had a small bundle of fresh carnations in a vase. Marcus stopped 3 feet from the headstone, his throat closing up. His mother. She came every week, she'd told him at the funeral, trying to get him to join her. But he'd made excuses. Work, distance, the weather, anything to avoid standing here and facing what he'd done. The stone was simple grey granite, nothing fancy. Linda had wanted it that way. No angels, no elaborate verse, just the facts. Beloved wife. 1941-1979. 38 years old. Gone before she'd seen 40, before they'd had the children she'd wanted, before she'd gotten to retire and travel and do all the things she'd put off for someday. And Marcus had stolen 2 days of her final months to sleep with Rachel in a Nashville hotel room. His legs gave out. He dropped to his knees on the grass, the damp earth soaking through his slacks, and pressed his palms against the cold stone. "Linda," his voice cracked. "God, Linda, I'm sorry." The words opened something inside him. Tears came hot and sudden. 14 months of grief he'd been swallowing finally breaking through. He cried like he hadn't cried at the funeral, where he'd stood stone-faced and accepting condolences and lying to everyone who said what a devoted husband he'd been. Devoted? What a sick joke. "I cheated on you." The words came out in a rush, raw and ugly. "While you were sick, while you were home doing chemo and losing your hair and fighting to stay alive, I was at that conference in Nashville, and I met someone, and I slept with her. Just once. Just one night. Like that makes it better. Like the number matters." A breeze moved through the cemetery, rustling the oak leaves overhead. Marcus kept talking. "You called me 3 times that night. I saw your name on the message slips, and I didn't call you back because I was with her. And then in the morning you called again, and when I finally called you back, you asked where I'd been, and I lied. I told you the conference ran late. And you believed me because you trusted me. Because you loved me." His fingers dug into the grass beside the headstone, ripping up clumps of earth. Dirt packed under his fingernails. Real. Solid. Not the dream logic horror of the penitent, but the concrete weight of what he'd actually done. "You died 4 months later, and you never knew. I made sure you never knew. I thought, God, I thought I was being kind. Sparing you. Why hurt you with something that didn't matter anymore, right? Why make your last days harder?" Marcus laughed, the sound bitter and broken. "But that wasn't kindness. That was cowardice. I didn't tell you because I couldn't face what I'd done. Couldn't face losing you, and knowing the last thing you'd feel was betrayal." He pressed his forehead against the cool stone, closed his eyes, remembered Linda in the hospital bed, skeletal and grey, holding his hand with what little strength she had left. "I love you," she'd whispered the night before she died. "You're my whole world." And he'd smiled and kissed her papery cheek and said, "I love you too," while the lie rotted inside him like cancer. "Last night," Marcus said quietly, "something came for me. Something that wore your face and spoke with your voice and knew what I'd done. It offered me forgiveness, Linda. It promised peace. All I had to do was open the door and let it in." The breeze picked up, stronger now, sending leaves skittering across the grass. Marcus didn't look up. "I almost did it. I almost believed that you'd come back to tell me it was okay, that you forgave me, that we could be together again, because I wanted it to be true so badly. I wanted to stop carrying this weight. His hands flattened against the headstone, fingers splayed across Linda's name. But it wasn't you. It was something else. Something that feeds on guilt and secrets and the lies we tell ourselves. And when I asked it our wedding song, the one we danced to at the reception, it couldn't answer, because it wasn't you. It was just wearing your shape. Marcus pulled back, sitting on his heels, and looked at the headstone through blurred vision. So I didn't open the door. I told it the truth instead. I said I'd betrayed you, that I'd lied, that I wasn't there when you needed me. And when I said it out loud, when I stopped hiding from it, the thing couldn't touch me anymore. A couple walked past on a distant path, elderly and slow, holding hands. They didn't look his way, just two more mourners in a place full of grief. I can't ask you to forgive me, Marcus continued, voice steadier now. I don't have that right. You're gone, and I have to live with what I did, and there's no absolution coming. But I can promise you this, I'm done lying. To myself, to everyone else. I'm done pretending it didn't happen, or that it doesn't matter. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Found Rachel's business card tucked behind a gas receipt, the number she'd written on the back in the hotel lobby. Call me if you're ever in town. Marcus tore it in half, then in quarters. Let the pieces flutter down onto Linda's grave like snow. I'm cutting ties with her. I'm done with that. And I'm going to figure out how to live with this, really live, not just exist and drink and run from the guilt. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to try. The sun broke through the oak branches, warming his face. Marcus closed his eyes and tilted his head back, letting the light wash over him. No divine sign, no voice from beyond the grave, just October warmth and the smell of earth and the quiet presence of the dead who couldn't answer. But something in his chest eased anyway. I loved you, he said softly. I still do. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The words hung in the air for a moment, then faded into the rustle of leaves and the distant sound of a lawnmower. No thunder, no revelation, just the simple, terrible truth spoken out loud. Marcus wiped his eyes and started to push himself to his feet. His hand brushed something on the grass beside the headstone, something that hadn't been there when he'd arrived. A hospital bracelet. White paper, standard medical issue, with a patient name and admission date printed in black ink. Webb, Linda M., admitted October 15th, 1980. Today's date. Marcus's breath stopped. He picked up the bracelet with trembling fingers, the paper band intact and unsealed, as if it had just come from a hospital printer. But Linda had been dead for over a year, and he'd driven straight here from Ironwood Retreat. There was no hospital anywhere nearby. The penitent. It had marked him, after all. For a long moment, Marcus just stared at the bracelet, his mind racing through possibilities. A trick. A warning. A promise that the thing wasn't done with him, that it would keep coming, keep wearing Linda's face, keep trying to break him down until he finally opened the door. Then he looked at Linda's headstone, at the flowers his mother had brought, at the simple grey granite that marked where his wife's body rested beneath 6 feet of earth. And he made a choice. Marcus set the bracelet gently on top of the headstone, right next to the vase of carnations. Let it sit there like an offering, an acknowledgement. I'm keeping the guilt, Linda, he said quietly, but I'm not keeping the lie anymore. And if that thing comes back wearing your face, I'll tell it the same thing I told it last night. You're not her, and I won't open the door. The bracelet fluttered in the breeze, paper crinkling, but it didn't blow away. Just sat there on the stone like a hospital souvenir from hell. Marcus straightened his jacket and wiped the dirt from his knees. His eyes were red and his face felt raw, but something in his chest had loosened. Not forgiveness, not absolution. Just the simple relief of having finally spoken the truth out loud to the person who deserved to hear it, even if she couldn't answer. He touched the headstone one more time, fingers tracing Linda's name. I'll come back, he promised. Every week, like Mom does. I'll bring flowers. I'll tell you about work and the weather and all the boring things you used to pretend to care about. And I'll keep trying to be better. For you. For me. The sun climbed higher overhead, burning off the last of the morning chill. Marcus walked back to his car, leaving the hospital bracelet on Linda's grave like a marker of something ended and something begun. In his wallet, Harold McKinnon's card sat waiting. On the passenger seat, Frank's iron horseshoe caught the light. The guilt was still there, but it was his now, not the penitent's, not buried anymore. And somehow that made all the difference. Marcus started the Buick and drove away from the cemetery, heading south through the October afternoon. He didn't know where he was going yet. Maybe home, maybe to find Harold McKinnon in Willow's Bend, maybe just anywhere the road led. But for the first time in 14 months, he wasn't running from the truth. He was learning to carry it instead. Scene 12. The road ahead. The afternoon sun rode low across the dashboard as Marcus drove south on Route 32, windows cracked to let in the October air. The Buick's engine hummed steady and reliable, eating up miles of two-lane highway that cut through farmland, going gold and brown with autumn. He'd been driving for 20 minutes since leaving the cemetery, no particular destination in mind, just following the road wherever it led. The guilt was still there. He could feel it, like a weight in his chest, settling into the space where his heart beat. But it felt different now, smaller, maybe, or just more honest. Not the festering secret that had made him ripe for the penitent's hunger, but something he could learn to live with. Something he could carry without letting it drag him under. His wedding ring caught the light when he adjusted his grip on the steering wheel. Linda's face flashed through his mind, not the skeletal, dying woman from those final weeks, but the way she'd looked on their wedding day. 23 years old, laughing at something the photographer had said, her dress catching the June sunlight like snow. "You're my whole world," she'd told him the night before she died. And he'd let her die believing the lie. Marcus's eyes burned, but no tears came. He'd cried them all out at her grave, kneeling in the damp grass and finally speaking the truth he'd buried for 14 months. The confession hadn't absolved him, nothing could do that, but it had made the weight bearable somehow, real instead of hidden. The radio crackled to life without him touching it. Static at first, the hiss and pop of empty airwaves searching for a signal. Marcus reached for the dial to shut it off, then froze. Music filtered through the interference, soft, familiar. A piano intro he knew better than his own heartbeat. At Last by Etta James. Their wedding song, the one they danced to at the reception while everyone watched and cried. The one he'd asked the penitent about when it had stood outside Unit 7 wearing Linda's face, and the thing couldn't answer because it didn't know, had never known, was just a parasite wearing stolen memories. Marcus's hand hovered over the radio dial. He could shut it off. Should shut it off. This was another trick, another test, the penitent reaching for him through the airwaves like it had reached through the window glass. But then Etta's voice filled the car, rich and warm and achingly real, singing about love that arrives like a dream come true. And Marcus remembered, not the hospital, not the morphine drip, or the goodbye he'd botched, or the affair that had poisoned everything, but the good moments, the real ones. Linda laughing at his terrible jokes, the way she'd curl against him on winter mornings, stealing his warmth, how she'd leave little notes in his briefcase when he travelled, "Miss you already, come home safe." The memories didn't erase what he'd done, but they were real too, part of the whole complicated truth of who they'd been together. Marcus left the radio on. The song played through to the end, no static, no distortion, just Etta James singing about love and longing and dreams come true. When it finished, the radio went silent. No DJ voice, no ad for car dealerships or furniture sales, just quiet. Marcus exhaled slowly, checked the rearview mirror, empty road behind him, fields on either side, nothing watching from the shadows. Maybe it was just a song. Maybe the radio had caught a signal from some distant station at exactly the right moment. Or maybe something else, something that wasn't the penitent, had wanted him to remember that love existed alongside guilt, that his marriage had been more than just the way it ended. He didn't know, couldn't know. But he chose to take it as a gift, rather than a threat. The highway curved east, following the river valley toward towns Marcus barely remembered the names of. He'd driven this route 100 times over the years, back when Linda was alive, and they'd visit her parents for Sunday dinners. The landscape was familiar, in that half-noticed way of roads you'd travelled too many times to really see anymore. But something made him pull over at a scenic overlook near mile marker 47. Marcus parked and got out, stretching road-stiff muscles, and walked to the wooden railing that marked the cliff edge. Below him, the valley spread out in autumn glory, patchwork farmland, the silver ribbon of the river, clusters of houses that looked like toys from this height. The wind carried the smell of wood smoke and distant rain. He pulled out his wallet, found Harold McKinnon's card between his license and Linda's old Medicare card. The heavy paper stock felt substantial between his fingers, real and solid and worn at the edges like it had been carried and consulted many times before Frank had given it to him. Harold McKinnon. An address on Maple Grove Road. No phone number, no explanation of what Harold actually did or why Frank thought Marcus might need him. Just a name and a place. One of the last guardians, Frank had said. He'll know what you went through. Marcus turned the card over. Still blank. No secret message, no hidden warning. Just an invitation to talk to someone who understood that the darkness was real and that it marked people. The hospital bracelet from this morning flashed through his mind. His name printed on paper that shouldn't exist, left under the door of Unit 7 like a promise or a threat. And the one on Linda's grave, dated today, appearing from nowhere while he'd knelt confessing. The penitent had marked him. Frank's words. It might come looking again. Different place, different face. Marcus didn't know if he'd have the strength to refuse it a second time. Didn't know if saying the truth out loud once was enough to keep it from burrowing back into his guilt and feeding there like rot in wood. But he knew he didn't want to face it alone. He tucked Harold's card back in his wallet, but this time in the front pocket, where he could find it easily. Then he pulled out his own business card, Marcus Webb, Regional Sales Manager, Medical Equipment Solutions, and stared at it for a long moment. This was who he'd been. The successful salesman with the nice car and the expensive suits and the lies that came as easy as breathing when Linda asked where he'd been. The man who'd built a career on reading people and telling them what they wanted to hear. But maybe that didn't have to be who he was anymore. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and found the small notebook he carried for client notes. Flipped to a blank page, pulled out his pen. He wrote quickly, hand cramping slightly from the awkward angle. Things to do. 1. Call Rachel. Tell her we're done. Really done. 2. Visit Mom. Thank her for tending Linda's grave. 3. Stop drinking. Or at least stop drinking alone. 4. Go back to the cemetery. Every week. Keep the promise. 5. Figure out what being better actually means. He paused, pen hovering over the paper. Then added, 6. If the dreams start again, or if I hear Linda's voice when I know I shouldn't, call Harold McKinnon. The list was simple, probably insufficient, but it was a start, a roadmap for learning to live with what he'd done, instead of just running from it. Marcus capped the pen and pocketed the notebook, looked out over the valley one more time. Somewhere down there, people were living ordinary lives. Making dinner, watching TV, fighting, and loving and doing all the messy human things that filled the hours between birth and death. None of them knew about Ironwood Retreat, or the penitent or the guardians who watched the hollow. None of them had to, but Marcus knew now. Had stood in Unit 7, with the thing wearing his dead wife's face, and chosen truth over the comfort of lies. Had driven away from the hollow still breathing, still carrying his guilt, but not carrying it alone anymore. That had to count for something. He walked back to the Buick, climbed in, and sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. The sun was sinking toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. In a few hours it would be dark, and he'd need to decide where to spend the night. Not Ironwood Retreat. Never there again. But maybe not running either. Maybe just finding a motel, getting some sleep, and waking up tomorrow ready to start crossing items off that list he'd made. Marcus pulled Harold's card out one more time, studied the address. Willow's Bend was maybe 40 miles southwest of here, an hour's drive at most. He could go there now. Show up at Harold McKinnon's door and ask for, what? Answers? Protection? Proof that he wasn't losing his mind? Or he could go home. Back to his empty apartment that still smelled like Linda's perfume. Face the silence and the memories and the ordinary work of learning to live again. The choice felt important somehow, a turning point. Marcus thought about Frank standing alone in Ironwood's parking lot, watching over a place built to contain darkness. Thought about Linda in her grave, forever 38, forever unaware of what he'd done. Thought about the penitent waiting in the hollow, feeding on guilt and secrets, patient as stone. Then he thought about the list in his notebook, the small, practical steps toward being better, toward living instead of just existing. He started the engine, not toward Willow's Bend, not yet. He'd keep Harold's card, keep the iron horseshoe Frank had given him, keep the one from Unit 7 in his jacket pocket. Insurance against the darkness if it came calling again. But right now, he needed to go home. Make that call to Rachel. Pour the rest of his liquor down the sink. Start the hard, boring work of building a life he could actually live with. The Buick pulled back onto Route 32, heading south as the sun sank lower. Marcus drove with the windows down, letting the October air wash over him. The radio stayed silent. No more songs, no more signs, just the hum of the engine and the whisper of wind. In the rearview mirror, the scenic overlook receded into the distance. The valley spread out behind him, beautiful and indifferent. Somewhere in those hills, Ironwood Retreat sat waiting. Somewhere in the hollow, the penitent watched and hungered. And somewhere in a cemetery 2 hours north, a hospital bracelet fluttered on a grey granite headstone. But Marcus was moving forward. Not running, not hiding, just moving. And for the first time since Linda's funeral, that felt like enough. The road stretched out ahead, ordinary and real, and full of ordinary dangers that had nothing to do with creatures that wore the faces of the dead. Traffic lights and rush hour, and the risk of black ice come winter. Bills to pay and clients to call, and the small humiliations of existing in the world. Marcus had faced worse in Unit 7, had stood his ground when the easy thing would have been to open the door and let the guilt consume him. Had spoken the truth when the lie would have been kinder. He could face the ordinary horrors too, the grief that wouldn't leave, the guilt that had earned. The memory of Linda looking at him with trust while he smiled and lied and let her die without knowing who he really was. It would hurt. Every day it would hurt. But he'd carry it anyway. Because that's what the living did with the weight of the dead. They learned to carry it forward, step by step, mile by mile, until the burden became part of them instead of the thing that crushed them. Marcus drove into the fading light, wedding ring still on his finger, Harold McKinnon's card in his wallet, and the truth finally spoken out loud. The guilt was his to keep, but the lie was done, and somehow that made all the difference. Epilogue. The bracelet night settled over Ironwood Retreat like a blanket pulled tight. The October darkness absolute beneath trees that blocked out moon and stars. Frank Harmon walked the grounds with his flashlight, the beam cutting through shadows that seemed to lean in as he passed. This was his routine. Had been for 7 years since his father died. Every night at 9:30, after the siren sounded and the last lights went dark in whatever units were occupied, Frank walked the fence line and checked the wards. Most nights nothing stirred. The hollow slept. The creek whispered. The darkness waited with patient malice, but it waited behind the boundaries his father and the other guardians had built. Tonight felt different. Frank's breath fogged in the cold air as he made his way past Units 8, 9, and 10. All empty, had been since summer, when a couple from Cincinnati had cut their weekend short after hearing whispers from the creek. They'd left at dawn, pale and shaken, and Frank hadn't tried to stop them. Some people weren't meant to face what lived in the hollow. Better they ran while they still could. Unit 7's porch light was on. Frank always left it burning for 3 nights after a guest departed, an old superstition his father had taught him. Let the light chase out anything that might be lingering, the old man had said. Give it time to remember it's not welcome. Frank climbed the steps to Unit 7, noting the damp footprints that led from the woods to the door. Small, barefoot, wrong. The door was locked. He'd checked it himself that morning after Marcus drove away. But when Frank's flashlight swept across the threshold, he saw water pooling beneath the frame. Creek water, dark and smelling of rot and old secrets. His hand went to the iron bar tucked in his belt. Not the fireplace poker like Harold carried, but a length of rebar blessed by his father the year before he died. Old iron, old words, old protections that still held weight in places like this. Frank didn't open the door. Instead, he walked the perimeter of the unit, checking the windows. At the back window, the one that faced the woods and the distant glimmer of Nakin Creek, he found what he'd been dreading. A hospital bracelet pressed against the glass from inside. White paper band, the ends unsealed, the printing visible even through the condensation. Webb, Marcus J. Admitted October 18th, 1980 to today's date. The date Marcus had left Ironwood Retreat alive and unmarked, or so Frank had hoped. The penitent had tagged him after all. Frank pressed his palm against the window glass. Cold. Far colder than October night should account for. On the other side, the bracelet fluttered as if caught in a breeze, though the air inside the unit should have been still. "You can't have him," Frank said quietly to the darkness beyond the glass. "He refused you." Spoke the truth and walked away. That's the rule. That's always been the rule. The temperature dropped further. Frank's breath came out in thick clouds now, his flashlight beam dimming as if the cold itself was draining the batteries. From inside Unit 7 came a sound like breathing. Too deep, too wet, wrong in the way that made Frank's skin crawl even after 7 years of watching The Hollow. Then silence. The bracelet fell from the glass and disappeared into the darkness of the unit's interior. The cold retreated. The flashlight beam steadied. Frank stood there for another 5 minutes, watching and waiting, but nothing else moved. Finally, he pulled the master key from his pocket and unlocked the door. The interior of Unit 7 was freezing, his breath fogging immediately when he stepped inside. Every surface was damp: walls, furniture, the kitchen counter, the floor. Not wet enough to pool, just that persistent dampness that spoke of creek water and hollow mist and things that shouldn't be able to manifest in locked rooms. The hospital bracelet lay on the floor in the center of the sitting area, directly beneath where the iron horseshoe had hung before Marcus took it with him. The threshold was unprotected now, the door just wooden lock, with no iron to ward against what lived in the hollow. That's how the bracelet had gotten in. Because Marcus had opened something when he'd finally spoken his truth. Had created a connection, however brief, between himself and the thing that fed on guilt. The penitent marked its prey, and sometimes those marks lingered even after the prey escaped. Frank picked up the bracelet with careful fingers. The paper was damp and cold, the ink slightly smudged but still readable. Marcus's name, today's date, a promise from the darkness that it wasn't finished with him yet. "Stubborn thing," Frank muttered. "He got away. You failed." The temperature in the room plummeted. Frank's flashlight flickered. From the bathroom came the sound of water dripping, slow, deliberate, though he knew the pipes were shut off for the season. Frank walked to the fireplace, the iron bar in his hand humming with potential energy, the way it always did when the penitent was close. The maintenance shed would have been safer for this, but something told him it needed to be done here, in the unit where Marcus had made his choice. He pulled a book of matches from his jacket pocket, lit one, held the hospital bracelet over the flame until the paper caught and curled, burning with a greasy smoke that smelled wrong, not like paper at all, but like creek water and rot and the sweet, sick scent of decay. The bracelet burned fast, consumed in seconds, leaving only a small pile of ash in Frank's palm. He spoke words his father had taught him, the old language of binding and banishment that the Guardians had used for generations. Iron above, iron below. What's marked is burned. What's burned is cleansed. The debt is paid. The claim is void. Release your hold. The temperature normalized. The dripping stopped. The dampness on the walls began to evaporate, leaving Unit 7 feeling merely cold instead of violated. Frank dusted the ash into the fireplace and stepped back outside, locking the door behind him. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. In his pocket, his hand found the second object he'd been carrying all day. Another hospital bracelet. This one older, the paper yellowed with time, the ink faded but still legible. Harmon, James E. Admitted, December 21, 1973, his father. Dead of a heart attack while working the fence line, or so the death certificate claimed. But Frank had found him collapsed near the creek with this bracelet on his wrist, and he'd burned it, just like he'd burned Marcus's tonight. The penitent had marked his father too. Maybe that's why the old man had died, finally giving in after years of standing watch, finally letting the guilt and exhaustion wear him down until the thing in the hollow could claim him. Or maybe James Harmon had simply worked himself to death trying to protect people who didn't even know they needed protecting. Either way, Frank had burned that bracelet and buried his father and taken up the watch. 7 years now. 7 years of walking the fence line and checking the wards and burning the occasional hospital bracelet that appeared in the units. How much longer could he do this? How many more people could he warn and save and send away before the hollow finally claimed him too? Frank didn't know, but he knew he wasn't done yet. He walked back to the maintenance shed, his flashlight beam steady now, the October night merely cold instead of hostile. Behind him, Unit 7 sat quiet and empty, the porch light burning like a small defiance against the darkness. Somewhere out there, Marcus Webb was driving home. Maybe he'd use Harold McKinnon's card. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe the penitent would come for him again in some different place, wearing some different face. Or maybe burning the bracelet had been enough to sever the connection, to tell the hollow that this particular prey had escaped for good. Frank hoped it was the latter. Marcus had done the hard thing, spoken truth instead of giving in to guilt. He deserved to live with his burden instead of being consumed by it. But Frank knew the hollow didn't care about deserving. It cared about hunger and feeding and the dark places where secrets festered into something the penitent could use. He locked the shed behind him and headed for his small quarters in the main office building. Tomorrow he'd air out Unit 7, mop the dampness away, replace the iron horseshoe with a fresh one. Make it ready for the next guest who might stumble across Ironwood Retreat, looking for quiet and finding something else entirely. The work continued. The watch never ended. And in the hollow beyond the fence line, where Naken Creek whispered its old secrets and the trees leaned in to listen, the penitent settled back into the darkness and waited, patient as stone, hungry as always, waiting for the next guest to arrive with guilt thick enough to taste, waiting for the next door to open, waiting.